Hey guys, welcome back to Mind Rules. And today's episode is, well, pretty wild. We're going to London, 2007, where a 29-year-old guy, literally just in his underwear, ran into the street bleeding and screaming. Now, why was this poor man basically half naked and covered in blood? Well, earlier that morning, he'd been chained up and held hostage in a nearby apartment. But somehow he managed to escape. And when he did, he revealed who was behind it all. And here's the shocking part, it wasn't some random stranger. It was one of Britain's most famous celebrities at the time, 46-year-old pop star Boy George. Now, Boy George is actually getting a biopic made about his life right now. And honestly, that's what inspired me to cover this case, because this guy isn't just kind of famous. He's iconic. Not only did he have a solo career as Boy George, but he was also the frontman of the band Culture Club. You know, the ones who did Karma Chameleon. I'm not about to sing it for you, but I guarantee that song's already looping in your head. Sorry about that. If you're into reality TV, maybe you've seen Boy George pop up on Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, or as a coach on The Voice, or even on I'm a Celebrity. Get me out of here. Those are his more recent projects, but let's rewind a bit, because this guy first shot to fame back in the 80s during the new romantic era of music. He wasn't just a singer, he was a look. Makeup, bold fashion, gender-bending outfits. He was one of the first mainstream stars to completely blur the lines of gender expression. And it wasn't just the UK that loved him. Boy George was selling out tours across multiple continents. Honestly, he was Mr. Worldwide before Pitbull ever claimed the title. At the height of his fame in 1985, George, whose real name is George Allen O'Dowd, came out as bisexual. And remember, this was in the middle of the AIDS crisis, when homophobia was at an all-time high. It was a massive deal for him to come out publicly. Then about a decade later, when he was in his mid-30s, he came out as gay, and he's still identified that way ever since. To fans, he was brave, unapologetically himself, and became a huge symbol for the LGBTQ+ community. But here's the thing, behind the fame, George's personal life was spiraling. And in 2007, he'd do something so disturbing that it landed him in court, and eventually prison. And since he's now working on a movie about himself, people are seriously wondering if he's going to gloss over this part of his story, or try to rewrite what really happened. That's why today we're telling this case from the perspective of his victim, Audun Carlsen. Before we dive all the way in though, quick warning, this episode deals with some really sensitive stuff, violence, drug abuse, and torture. Viewer discretion, as always, is advised. So, George Allen O'Dowd, better known as Boy George, was born June 14, 1961 in Kent, England. He grew up in southeast London in a big Irish family with 6 kids. Home life was quite rough, to put it lightly. His dad had a violent temper, often taking it out on George's mom, and the kids all witnessed it. By around age 11, George would escape the chaos at home by going on long walks. And he actually discovered where David Bowie lived, so he'd walk by Bowie's house just to stare at it, completely starstruck. Bowie was his idol, and that influence stuck with him. While George's brothers were into cars, football, and chasing girls, George was more into jewelry, makeup, and, of course, David Bowie. And by 1981, when he was 20, he formed Culture Club. And wow, did they blow up fast. In 1982, they released Do You Really Want to Hurt Me?, which became a massive international hit. Remember, this was pre-social media, so for a band to reach audiences in Asia and Africa back then, that's how huge they were. Their music was catchy, but Boy George himself was the real draw. His androgynous style, makeup, skirts with top hats, sometimes a full beard, was something the mainstream had never seen before. In the early 80s, he was arguably the first globally famous figure to publicly reject traditional gender norms. Now, while some people loved his uniqueness, this was the 80s when homophobia was rampant. A lot of people hated it. But just as many, especially young people questioning their own gender or sexuality, saw George as an icon. For the LGBTQ+ community, having such a visible, unapologetic figure was huge. Especially during the AIDS epidemic, when the community was being vilified, ignored, and left to suffer. At the time, AIDS was wrongly thought to be a gay disease. Governments were slow, painfully slow, to step up. In the UK, they even passed a law that basically banned officials from supporting anything seen as promoting homosexuality. But not everyone turned their back. In 1987, Princess Diana famously opened the UK's first AIDS ward and shook the hand of a man with HIV, publicly proving you couldn't catch AIDS by touching someone. That simple act helped break down so much stigma. By the end of the 80s, thanks to relentless activism from the LGBTQ+ community and allies, research and treatment finally started improving. So, why am I telling you all this? Because Boy George wasn't just a pop star, he was a symbol during that era. And for someone who represented so much hope and visibility, the crime he committed in 2007 hits even harder. So let's fast forward a bit. By the late 90s, Boy George's career was still doing well, but behind the scenes he was spiraling. He'd started using drugs heavily, especially heroin and cocaine. And eventually it caught up with him. By 2005, he'd been arrested for cocaine possession in New York City and sentenced to community service. Remember those tabloid photos of him sweeping the streets of Manhattan in an orange vest?
I mean, you think I'm trying to fair, Jordan? No, I'm fair, but it's just the press goes and you fucking chasing me around. Fuck off. Go away.
Don't push.
This is ridiculous.
Yep, that was Boy George paying off his drug charges. Even though he claimed to be clean, afterward, his behavior was messy, to put it nicely. And that brings us to 2007, when he crossed paths with a 28-year-old man named Audun Carlsen. Audun wasn't a celebrity, he was a model from Norway who'd moved to London. He was openly gay, friendly, and made his living through photography, modeling, and DJing. Pretty normal young guy just trying to make it. And one day he got an unexpected message from Boy George himself. George had come across Audun's modeling photos online and reached out, asking if Audun wanted to come over for a photo shoot. Now imagine this. You're in your 20s still figuring out your career, and a global superstar slides into your messages asking to collaborate. Of course you'd be curious. Audun agreed, but it didn't exactly go as planned. When he showed up at George's apartment for the shoot, things got weird. George acted paranoid, accusing Audun of messing with his computer, even suggesting that Audun had tried to hack his files. Audun was like, no? I'm just here for photos. The shoot was uncomfortable, so Audun cut it short and left. But here's the strange part, George kept messaging him afterward. He apologized, smoothed things over, and convinced Audun to come back another time. And eventually, Audun did. This time it was late at night. George said he wanted to do a shoot with more creative vibes. Audun agreed, not realizing what was about to happen. When Audun arrived, George offered him some cocaine. Audun said no, but George didn't take it well. And then, out of nowhere, George accused him again, this time insisting that Audun had hacked into his laptop and messed with personal files. Now here's where things turned dark. George's paranoia went off the rails. He demanded Audun log into his computer to prove he hadn't stolen anything. Audun refused, confused and scared. And that's when George snapped. He grabbed handcuffs, chained Audun to a wall hook and started shouting at him. He accused him of being a thief, a liar, even part of some gay mafia that was supposedly out to get George. Audun was terrified. He had no idea what was happening or how to get out. And then George took things even further. According to Audun, George picked up a metal chain and started beating him with it. Over and over. Audun was trapped, chained to the wall, and could only scream. George, meanwhile, was ranting, pacing, accusing him of all kinds of wild stuff. It went on for hours. Finally, by some miracle, Audun managed to break free. Still in his underwear, bleeding, he bolted out of the apartment, down the street, and straight toward help. Neighbors called the police, and when they arrived, Audun told them everything. And just like that, the pop star who once symbolized freedom and individuality was suddenly at the center of a nightmare kidnapping and assault case. So, the police arrested Boy George and charged him with false imprisonment, basically holding someone against their will. He denied the charges at first, of course, saying the whole thing was exaggerated. But when the case went to trial in 2008, Audun took the stand and testified in detail about what happened. He showed his injuries, told the court about the chains, the paranoia, and the beating. And the jury believed him. George was found guilty and sentenced to 15 months in prison. Now, in the grand scheme of celebrity scandals, you'd think something like this would completely destroy a career, right? I mean, we're talking about chaining someone to a wall and beating them. But Boy George? He served only 4 months of that sentence before being released early on good behavior. Just 4 months, I mean, really it makes you wonder if it was because of his celebrity status he served so little time. And afterward, he went back to performing, making music, appearing on TV, and even getting invited onto reality shows. Which begs the question, how did this not ruin him? Well, part of it comes down to timing. This was 2008, before cancel culture, before social media outrage cycles could explode in real time. News coverage was there, but it was easier for celebrities to just lay low and then re-emerge once people moved on. Also, a lot of George's fans refused to believe he was guilty. They insisted it was all a misunderstanding, or that Audun exaggerated the story. Others just didn't care. They love Boy George too much to cut ties. And let's be real, celebrity privilege plays a massive role here. For a regular person, that kind of conviction would have destroyed their life. But Boy George? He got a slap on the wrist and then carried on with his career. So, why are we talking about this now, almost 2 decades later? Because Boy George's biopic is in production, and people are wondering whether this part of his past will even make the cut. Will the movie show him chaining and beating someone? Or will it be spun into a rockstar meltdown moment that gets brushed aside? That's the thing about celebrity narratives, they often get rewritten to make the star look better. But for Audun, this wasn't just a bad night. It was trauma. He still carries the scars, both physical and emotional. And his story deserves to be remembered, not erased. Looking back, it's such a bizarre contradiction. On one hand, Boy George is remembered as this trailblazer, an openly gay, gender nonconforming icon who inspired millions. On the other, he committed a violent crime that nearly destroyed another man's life. Both things are true. Both exist side by side. And it really makes you think, how much can we separate an artist from their art? Can you still listen to Karma Chameleon knowing what Boy George did in 2007? Or does it forever taint the music? That's the uncomfortable question fans have to wrestle with. So after serving just 4 months of his 15-month sentence, Boy George walked free in May 2009. And right away he started trying to rebuild his image. He went back to music, booking gigs, doing interviews, and even eventually joining culture club reunions. In 2016 he became a coach on The Voice UK. Later he even showed up on The Voice Australia and, believe it or not, as a contestant on I'm a Celebrity. Get Me Out of Here. In 2022. So yeah, he didn't exactly fade away in disgrace. He leaned right back into the spotlight. But here's what's frustrating. The assault and imprisonment rarely get mentioned in these newer projects. It's like this dark chapter just gets brushed aside. Fans watching him on TV probably have no idea he once chained up and beat a guy in his apartment. Now, George himself has addressed it, but in a very Boy George way. In interviews he's downplayed it, called it an incident, or chalked it up to drugs and paranoia. He's never really shown the kind of accountability you'd expect for something so violent. And that's what makes this upcoming biopic such a big deal. Is he finally going to own up to the reality of what happened? Or will it be another carefully polished version of his life story that skips the ugly parts? Meanwhile, what about the victim, Audun Carlsen? Well, after the attack, Audun spoke to the press about his ordeal. He described how terrifying it was, how humiliating it felt to be chained up and beaten, and how he thought he might not survive. He said George not only physically hurt him but tried to humiliate him. Audun wanted people to understand, this wasn't just a celebrity scandal. This was torture. And honestly, his bravery in speaking out is the reason we even know the details today. Without Audun's testimony, George might have gotten away with painting this as just some lover's spat or a misunderstanding. But the truth matters. And that's why cases like this should never be glossed over, no matter how famous the perpetrator is. Because at the end of the day, Audun was just a regular guy who trusted someone powerful, and ended up traumatized because of it. And here's where we zoom out a bit. This case is a textbook example of celebrity privilege. Think about it. If some random guy had chained up another man, beaten him with a chain, and kept him prisoner, he'd be locked up for years. It's as simple as that, no questions asked. But because this was Boy George, famous, wealthy, beloved by fans, he served only a few months and went right back to TV gigs and music festivals. It's frustrating, but it's also a reminder. Fame can bend justice. Not always, but often enough to notice. So where are we today? Boy George is still working. He still tours, still books TV appearances, and is very active on social media. The biopic of his life is currently in production, with big names attached. And honestly, it'll probably be a hit. But the big question is, will the film tell the whole story, or just the fun, glittery parts? If it skips over what happened to Audun Carlsen, that's not just rewriting George's life, it's erasing Audun's. And that's not okay. So what do we take away from this? Boy George is a complicated figure. On one hand, he was a groundbreaking artist who helped challenge gender norms and gave hope to millions during a time of fear and prejudice. On the other, he committed a violent, inexcusable crime against another man. Both truths exist. They don't cancel each other out, but they can't be separated either. And as fans, or just as people who care about justice, we have to hold both realities at once. We can acknowledge his impact on music and LGBTQ+ visibility while also refusing to ignore what he did to Audun Carlsen. So the next time you hear his chart-busting song, Karma Chameleon, or see Boy George pop up on a reality show, remember, there's more to the story than the glitzy headlines. And it's important we don't forget the victims in these cases, no matter how famous the perpetrator is. Alright, that's it for today's episode. If you found this story eye-opening, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Boy George's biopic should cover the assault and imprisonment? Or do you think the public only wants the music legend version of his story? I'll be reading your comments. I always love hearing your takes. Thanks for hanging out with me, and as always, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.